The story of the United States and China. It's a complex narrative filled with twists, turns, and moments that have shaped the modern world. Is one of the most important of our time. Their relationship influences global economics, political alliances, and even cultural trends. Understanding its nuances is crucial. It's a relationship that has swung from friendship to enmity, a pendulum constantly in motion, from isolation to deep connection, marked by periods of intense cooperation and stark division. The ties that bind them are as strong as the forces that pull them apart. Understanding this history is essential to understanding today's world. It provides context for current events and offers insights into potential future trajectories. During World War II, America and China stood together against a common enemy. They forged a bond in the face of adversity, united by a shared goal of defeating tyranny. But that alliance soon shattered with the rise of the People's Republic of China. A new political order emerged, reshaping the landscape of Asia and the world. The two nations became rivals in the Cold War, caught in a global ideological struggle that defined an era. Viewing each other with suspicion and hostility, propaganda campaigns fueled animosity, and the threat of nuclear war loomed large. For over 2 decades they were locked in a standoff, broken only by moments of conflict. Proxy wars and regional tensions kept the world on edge, yet the world kept changing, and so did their interests. New challenges and opportunities arose, forcing a reassessment of old alliances and rivalries. Leaders in Washington and Beijing began to see the need for dialogue, recognizing that cooperation could be mutually beneficial. Small gestures like a game of table tennis became symbols of hope and a sign of thawing relations. Grew into historic diplomatic breakthroughs, paving the way for a new era of engagement. This is the story of how two great nations became rivals, locked in a complex dance of competition and cooperation, and how they began to talk again, seeking common ground amidst their differences. Let's begin in the fires of World War II, a crucible that forged unexpected alliances. When the United States and China fought side by side, united against a common foe, laying the foundation for a relationship that would soon be tested. World War II was a conflict that reshaped the global landscape, forging unexpected alliances in the face of common enemies. In this tumultuous period, the United States and China, despite their vast differences in ideology and culture, became unlikely partners, united in their opposition against Imperial Japan's aggression in the Pacific. This alliance, though born of necessity, would have profound implications for the post-war world. China had already been engaged in a brutal and protracted war against Japan since 1937, enduring immense suffering and territorial losses. They stood as the first line of defense against Japanese expansionism. The United States, initially hesitant to enter the global conflict, was thrust into the war after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, solidifying the need for allies in the Pacific theater. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt recognized the strategic importance of China, led by Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist government, in the fight against Japan. He saw China as a crucial ally, capable of tying down a significant portion of the Japanese forces, preventing them from being deployed elsewhere in the Pacific. To bolster China's war effort, the U.S. government initiated a program of sending military advisors to train and assist the Chinese army. This was coupled with shipments of vital equipment, including weapons, vehicles, and other supplies, along with substantial financial aid to support the struggling Chinese economy. Among the most visible symbols of this alliance were the Flying Tigers, a group of American volunteer pilots who formed a squadron within the Chinese Air Force. Flying their distinctive shark-nosed P-40 Warhawk aircraft, they quickly gained fame for their daring exploits against the Japanese, becoming potent symbols of the partnership between the two nations. Looking beyond the immediate conflict, President Roosevelt envisioned China as one of the four policemen, alongside the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. These nations would be responsible for maintaining international peace and security in the post-war world, reflecting Roosevelt's belief in a cooperative global order. However, the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek was plagued by widespread corruption, which undermined its effectiveness and eroded public support. Furthermore, the nationalists were embroiled in a bitter civil war against the growing communist forces led by Mao Zedong, a conflict that further strained the country's resources and stability. Within the American government, officials were deeply divided over which side to support in the Chinese conflict. Some firmly backed Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government, viewing them as the legitimate representatives of China, while others, witnessing the communists' effectiveness in resisting the Japanese occupation, admired Mao Zedong's leadership and believed they held the key to China's future. Despite these internal divisions and the looming civil war, the alliance between the United States and China persevered, contributing significantly to the ultimate defeat of Japan. When the war finally came to an end in 1945, with Japan's unconditional surrender, there was a widespread sense of optimism and hope for a brighter future. Many hoped that the wartime partnership between the US and China would continue, playing a vital role in shaping a more peaceful and cooperative world order. However, beneath the surface of this optimism, deep-seated divisions and unresolved issues remained, threatening to unravel the fragile alliance. The seeds of future conflict sown during years of civil war and ideological struggle were already germinating, casting a shadow over the prospects for lasting peace. The long-simmering civil war in China was poised to erupt once again, plunging the nation into further turmoil and bloodshed. The wartime alliance, forged in the crucible of conflict, would soon be tested as the two nations found themselves on opposing sides of a growing ideological divide. The post-war world was on the cusp of a dramatic transformation, ushering in an era of Cold War tensions and reshaping the global balance of power. The end of World War II reignited China's civil war. The US backed Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists with billions in aid, hoping for a stable, friendly China. But Mao's communists, promising land reform and an end to corruption, gained ground. Despite American support, the nationalists collapsed. In 1949, Mao declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. The communist victory shocked the US and was seen as a major Cold War defeat. Chiang fled to Taiwan, setting up a rival government. The US refused to recognize Mao's regime, instead backing the nationalists in Taiwan. This decision set the stage for decades of hostility. The US adopted a policy of containment, viewing China as part of a global communist bloc. The dream of a democratic China was gone. Two camps now faced each other across the Pacific. The Cold War had a new front. The year is 1950. The world is gripped by the Cold War, a tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. This ideological battleground soon found a new and devastating theater. The Cold War in Asia turned hot in 1950 when North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union, launched a surprise invasion of the South, crossing the 38th parallel with overwhelming force. The US, under the UN flag, quickly condemned the aggression. Determined to contain the spread of communism, the United States intervened to defend South Korea, sending troops and resources to the peninsula. Pushing deep into North Korea, the Allied forces, spearheaded by the Americans, aimed to reunify the peninsula under a democratic government. U.S. forces, confident in their advance, neared China's border, the Yalu River. Alarmed by the prospect of a U.S.-aligned Korea on its border, Mao Zedong, the leader of China, issued warnings. When those warnings were ignored, he sent hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops, known as the People's Volunteer Army. They crossed the Yalu River in secret, launching a massive counteroffensive. The Chinese intervention stunned American forces who were unprepared for the sheer number of enemy soldiers and the harsh winter conditions. The tide of the war turned dramatically and the conflict descended into a bloody stalemate, marked by intense fighting and heavy casualties on both sides. For the first time, the Cold War had erupted into direct military confrontation. American and Chinese soldiers fought each other on a massive scale, engaging in brutal battles across the Korean peninsula. The Korean War created deep bitterness and animosity. It sowed the seeds of distrust between the two nations, poisoning their relationship for decades to come. In America, the war fueled anti-communist sentiment. Red China became synonymous with danger and aggression, a perceived threat to American values and interests. The U.S. commitment to defending Taiwan hardened, solidifying its support for the nationalist government against the communist mainland. For China, the war was a costly victory, achieved at a tremendous human price. The war boosted its prestige on the world stage, demonstrating its resolve, but it also deepened its isolation from the West. The war ended in 1953. After years of grueling fighting and stalled negotiations, it concluded with an armistice, not peace, leaving the Korean peninsula divided. The two countries were now sworn enemies, locked in a Cold War rivalry that would shape global politics for decades. Their relationship was defined by the memory of brutal conflict, a constant reminder of the ideological chasm that separated them. The Cold War in Asia was here to stay, with the Korean War serving as a stark warning of the potential for future conflicts. The divide seemed permanent, a seemingly insurmountable barrier between two nations on opposing sides of the ideological divide. After the Korean War, the US and China entered a deep freeze: no diplomacy, no trade, almost no contact. Each saw the other as the main threat to its security. The main flashpoint was Taiwan. The US pledged to defend Chiang Kai-shek's government there. China saw Taiwan as a breakaway province. Two Taiwan Strait crises in the 1950s brought the world to the brink of war. The US signed a defense treaty with Taiwan, making the island's security a cornerstone of its Asia policy. Meanwhile, China tested its first atomic bomb in 1964, becoming a nuclear power. Washington could no longer ignore Beijing. China was now a force to be reckoned with. The estrangement was total, but the world was changing. Taiwan remained the central obstacle between the US and China. For Washington, it was a key outpost. For Beijing, an unfinished civil war. The first Taiwan Strait crisis in 1954 saw China shelling nationalist-held islands. The US responded with threats of force, even nuclear weapons. Congress passed the Formosa Resolution, authorizing military action to defend Taiwan. Another crisis erupted in 1958, with more bombardment and US naval intervention. These standoffs solidified America's commitment to Taiwan and deepened Beijing's mistrust. The Taiwan issue blocked any hope of normal relations. As long as the US recognized Taipei, dialogue with Beijing was impossible. The standoff defined the relationship for decades. For years, the US saw China and the Soviet Union as a united communist bloc. But by the 1960s, deep cracks appeared between the two. Ideological disputes and border clashes turned them into rivals. The 1969 Ussuri River clashes showed the world they were now enemies. The Soviet Union even considered a preemptive strike on China's nuclear sites. The Sino-Soviet alliance was over. China now faced a hostile neighbor to the north. US strategists like Henry Kissinger saw an opportunity. If China and the USSR were enemies, the US could engage both. The Cold War triangle was shifting. A new opening with China was possible. The thaw began with a table tennis tournament in 1971. American players visited China, breaking 2 decades of silence. Behind the scenes, Nixon and Kissinger opened secret talks with Beijing. They saw a chance to pressure the Soviet Union and reshape the global balance. In 1972, Nixon made his historic visit to China. The world watched as he met Mao and Zhou Enlai, signaling a new era. The Shanghai Communique acknowledged differences, especially over Taiwan, but set a framework for cooperation. The US recognized one China, but did not abandon Taiwan. The visit ended decades of isolation. Diplomatic ties began to form. The world order was shifting. The US and China were no longer sworn enemies. A new relationship was taking shape. Nixon's visit opened the door, but full relations took years. The US and China opened liaison offices and began cautious exchanges. The main obstacle remained Taiwan. To recognize Beijing, the US had to break official ties with Taipei and end the defense treaty. This was controversial in America, seen by some as a betrayal. President Carter made the final move in 1978. The US recognized the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government. Official ties with Taiwan ended, but the Taiwan Relations Act maintained unofficial relations and security assurances. Full diplomatic relations began in 1979, ending 3 decades of hostility. The US and China entered a new era of engagement and cooperation, but old tensions and rivalries remained. The legacy of this transformation still shapes their relationship today.